So let's move it just a little bit because we've talked a little bit about the players and this and that. How much of this do we put on coaching? How much do we put on the coaches and Sarkisian? They inherit a program that won 7 games realistically without COVID. If Kansas, I'm assuming they beat Kansas last year. If Kansas was on the schedule, maybe that's an assumption. I don't know. Maybe it's a coin flip game. I'm going to assume that they beat Kansas last year. I will. Then they would have faced USF. They would have played my Bulls. Overall, this is probably a 9-win team that you're inheriting with if games don't get canceled. LSU ends up being a coin flip game, but let's just even say that's a loss. It's probably a 9-win team. It's a team that won 4 straight bowl games, but at least a team that in their last 2 caught fire. And then obviously we're looking at 4 wins and they may not win a bowl game. Okay, we've talked about talent being an issue. At some point, coaches have to coach up what they have. You know, there's guys out there, Baylor coaches up what they have, Oklahoma State coaches up what they have. How much of it do we say, okay, what part of, is on some of this on the coaching staff, Sarkisian and his new guys?
I'll jump in. I mean, a huge part. I was almost going to say all of it, but earlier I said it's a talent level too, so I can't say all of it. But listen, I mean, I think Sark said it. Hey, the buck stops with him. I mean, there is no excuse for being 4-6. Should this team be 10-0? Probably not. It doesn't have that kind of talent, but 4-6 is inexcusable. When Sark was hired, I just can't wrap my head around it. The reason I loved the hire, and I still think it's possible. I'm not throwing in the towel on Steve Sarkisian at all, but the reason I loved the hire Anwar was because I thought more than the previous staff, more than Charlie Strong, he would run a system that's going to maximize the talent. He's going to turn these slightly above average players into really good players because they're going to be ultra productive. The same way I think Lincoln Riley does it at Oklahoma. I think Lincoln Riley can take mediocre players, and listen, he's recruiting really well. I'm not saying he has mediocre players, but I think he could take pretty mediocre players and turn them into really good players. I mean, I think you've seen some of that with Sonny Dykes at SMU. I thought Sark could do that just because his system is so dynamic. It's just not happening. We're not seeing, other than Xavier Worthy, who has been fantastic, of course, but we're not seeing this rapid development of these players on offense, especially that I thought we'd see. Defense, that's a whole other issue. I mean, Kwiatkowski's got his own issues on defense, but yeah, I mean, I'll say it again. I don't think this is a roster that's littered with NFL talent, especially high-end NFL talent. I don't think if you're talking about top 2-round players, top 3-round players, over the next 3 or 4 years, how many of those players are on this roster? I don't think there's enough of them. I don't think there are a lot of them, but ultimately some of that comes back. A lot of that comes back to the coaches in development, putting them in schemes to be successful. We hear Sark say every week at his press conference, it's their job to put these guys in position to be successful and play at the best of their abilities. Well, it hasn't happened this year. So a lot of that blame does fall at the feet of the coaches.
Alex, what do you think?
I mean, I think strength and conditioning needs to have a long look after this season. I think that's a coach that it's behind the scenes that we don't get to see on the football field, with the schemes and stuff every week, but we've seen it very clearly with the athleticism and the physicality of these players week after week. I think that you need to look at that. I like what Sark said this week, and I liked how Kirk Bowles asked the question about, Sark directly, and look, here's the thing about Sark. He is, he stands up there, he takes it on the chin. He's the guy who says the buck stops with him. It's true. But here's the other thing. He needs to be that guy because he doesn't give us access to any of his coaches. He says he's going to be the face of the program. He says, you can't talk to any other coaches. Well, brother, I mean, it comes with the territory then that you're going to get all the slings and arrows at you. But Kirk Bowles says, do you need to maybe be more focused on the defense? And Sark's like, yeah, I mean, I thought to myself, I hadn't thought about that, but if Sark doesn't have any involvement on defense, that feels like a little bit of a waste of resources. I mean, sure, he's not a defensive guy, but he's a great offensive mind from all we know. It's like, why not get him in there and say like, well, Sark, if we're presenting you with this, look, what do you do? What do you do? Where are the where are the kinks in the armor here? Like, is there something that we should do as far as cheating a guy up, or maybe disguising this coverage in this way, or stuff like that? I mean, the input from the head coach, if he has the time to go into that level of detail with you, I think could be really helpful. And I think that could be one of the things that Coach Sark learned this year, that maybe he needs to be more involved in an all-encompassing fashion like that. And that's like, he's not going to get rid of much staff, I don't think. I mean, you guys Anwar, you're more plugged into me with people there around the program, and if you talk to them, if they feel like guys are going to be gone. But to me, it feels like they're putting, I mean, with the guys the people who I talk to feel like they're still putting on a real united front. It doesn't feel like anybody, and these votes of confidence this week from Chris Del Conte, the kind of pseudo vote of confidence from Kevin Eltife, being out at practice, leaking it to Brian Davis that he was out at practice as a show of support for Sark and what he's doing. It feels like they're still pretty unified. I'm not sure that there's going to be much of a mass exodus of any of these, certainly not coordinators, but even, in any of this staff farther down. I could be completely wrong. It doesn't feel, we've been around this program long enough. We've seen enough of these situations to where you start getting the vibes that things are really falling apart among the staff. And while things certainly feel like they're falling apart in the locker room right now, it does not feel the same way about the staff. So, it's going to take improvement with all these guys. And that's not to say lay all this blame at the feet of the defense. Clearly Sark has improvements to make, and his staff has improvements to make on the offensive side of the ball as well. But I think on the offensive side of the football, if you have a healthy, we talk about what the problems are with this team. And, maybe one thing we could point out too is that Casey Thompson has not been Casey Thompson since he hurt his thumb. Right. And so if you have a healthy quarterback, and if you bolster this offensive line some, it feels like it could disguise a whole lot of the issues that the offense has had this year. So I'm not as worried about the coaching staff and them turning it around or being able to change so much going into next year on the offensive side of the football. Because on the defensive side of the football, where it feels like the answers could legitimately be there. But as far as from an approach looking forward, I think that's how I see it.
It's interesting. The thing is, you said two things that I kind of wanted to respond to, Alex. He did talk about, Sarkisian said he was going to be more involved in the defense. And then he said, he would do it in the off season. And I thought to myself, no time like the present. I mean,
like when I do it now.
You got 2 more games, man. Like, what you going to wait till the off season? Like, you got to get bowl eligible. I'll do it later. Like, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Like, why not start this week versus West Virginia, as opposed to thinking I'll do that next year. That was the only part of his response. I liked it, him saying he needed to be more involved. I think Tom Herman kind of had the same issue with Tim Beck, where at some point he said, okay, I need to be more involved in the play calling, but I just didn't understand why he's going to wait until next year when your team's on a 5-game losing streak. They gave up 50+ versus Kansas at home. I just thought, you can do it now. I mean, no one's going to judge you if you want to do it now. The other thing too is, Alex, with the administration, coach, they have to be unified at this point. Del Conte has to be unified. Del Conte has to stick by Sarkisian. Like, he has no choice. First of all, they gave him a 6-year deal. Secondly, you're not going to do anything dramatic in year one. That would be crazy. But that's his guy. And he's married to him. Eltife is also married to him. So they have no choice but to stand up and support. Now, they didn't have to do that with Tom, because Tom was hired by an interim athletic director. So there was nobody who had to really stand on the table for him. But when you fire a coach who had given you wins and had given you bowl victories, and then you kind of take a little bit of a step out on faith with a coach who hadn't recorded more than 8 regular season wins as a head coach, yeah, you're probably going to have to show up and say, like, even after Kansas, and say, yeah, that's still our guy. We want you still support him. You have no choice. Like, there's
doesn't
no
it kind of go to Anwar he doesn't have his guys yet. They're passing the buck to Tom Herman and his staff, who wasn't their guy. He wasn't.
Yeah. But you know what's interesting about that, Jason? I will say, I know me, probably you. I don't know about Alex. we gave Herman so much shit over the fairy dust, pixie dust comment, right? About how this thing isn't going to happen. And remember when Urban Meyer went and ripped Tom? It was after the Maryland loss when he started saying, anyone who thought we were just going to sprinkle this what was it, fairy dust or pixie dust?
I don't remember. Yeah,
whatever. I don't know. I guess I don't watch enough cartoons, but whatever. Sprinkle this thing and make it da-da-da. And Urban ripped them, right? And said, these are your guys. And he goes, I hate it when these new coaches do that. And I applauded Urban because I said, ultimately, don't blame the players. This is your team. It's on you. And so there seems to be, now it's happening. And, it's like, well, it's the players. And everyone forgets, we're kind of sitting on our hands now. And everyone forgets that just a few years ago, we were applauding someone for the exact same sentiments. All right, let's do a couple more things. And before we get into parting shots, Alex, I know you did grades. Jason, I'm going to come to you recruiting last before we do parting shots. So Alex, give it to us. You did your grades. You did your offense and defense. I'm going to take a sip. I probably should put some vodka in here. Tell me your takeaways from what you saw when you studied the film.
No, I mean, the defense was miserable. I don't think we need to really rehash it. I mean, the defense was just bad. I talked about it earlier. The blown contains coming up as a issue recently. Lack of anything off the edge. Coverage burns. It was bad. It was a bad game. Everything that existed before as far as the run game, and then it's just the stuff on the outside on the edges was just too much to like. It's just so pathetic to say it's too much to overcome. But so for the offensive line this week, Junior Angelau graded out best. He didn't allow any disruption at all. I mean, the real story was, like I said in my offense column, it's like if you had a menu you were going to put together for like this disaster that occurred, it was like the main dish by far, like your steak on this dinner was the defensive nuclear implosion, right? But if you were talking about your little potatoes or your garnish, like the tackles, Derek Kerstetter played his worst game of the season. He allowed 4 pressures, 1 tackle for a loss. He also had what penalty did he have? Was it an illegal man down? I think he was an illegal man downfield. He had that penalty. And then on the other side, they had Christian Jones and Andre Carrick both rotating in. I should have it pulled up. Christian Jones played 50 snaps. Carrick played 26 snaps. Both those guys graded out as completely baseline average on the game, but they both had basically the exact same. They both allowed the exact same quarterback hit with this outside speed rush. They got their quarterback creamed. I know the Carricks ended up in a kind of a hit fumble. I'm not sure that Christian Jones's did, or whether they had to go back and review and find out whether it was a fumble or not, whether his arm was going forward. But anyway, both of them had bad quarterback hits. And then of course, whenever you have the other side, Derek Kerstetter is supposed to be your stalwart, grizzled vet type of dude, gives up 4 pressures in completely uncharacteristic form, plays his worst game of the season, his worst game of the last 3 seasons, actually. Those two things will add up, even though the guards played well. Tope Amati's played well these last 2 games. I mean, he's played above average, and Junior Angelau continues to be good. And the more you think about it, Derek Kerstetter's at the front of our mind as far as, could he play in the NFL? Is he the kind of guy who's going to get drafted, et cetera? I mean, it's becoming pretty clear that Junior Angelau is the better NFL prospect out of those 2 players. And it's looking like Derek Kerstetter. I mean, just based on at some point, it was like with Kent Perkins. At some point, you just got to call this stuff. And you got to say, look, we can't, he's been here however long. We're 8 games into his senior season. We keep talking about how strong he is, how big he is, how good he looks, all this stuff, how he could turn it on. He's got an NFL body. At some point you say, well, he kind of is what he is. I think at this point, probably about time to call it with Derek Kerstetter about him sort of being what he is. Because with the disruption numbers this year, he was at like not allowing disruption except once every, 46 snaps, something like that. With this game, with these 4 pressures, with the TFL, with the penalty, he's now down in like that 32 range. And he's profiling about like Zach Shackelford was as a senior, a fringe of the roster, kind of practice squad type, maybe NFL hopeful, who I would say, I wouldn't bet on him him being drafted at this point. And so that's your best player. That's the guy who's been the best player so far on the season. He and Angelau, at least with Angelau, you have him moving forward as the guy he's the guy you build around on the offense moving forward. It was encouraging to see him playing such a good game. But I think that the story of that game after watching the film was an implosion on the defense with just little side dishes of bad play from uncharacteristically bad play from your right tackle and your usual kind of spotty play from the left tackle side as they keep rotating Christian Jones and Andre Carrick.
Outside of Tope, you mentioned, were there any other bright spots that you saw? Were there any other? Paul, you said Junior graded out well. Tope did. Any other bright spots for you, Alex?
Well, I mean, there's only 5 of them, so I mean, but I would say that I'd say that Jake Majors played. I mean, Jake Majors played above. Let's just see. I mean, as far as his grade, I can look it up and see just on the season. I'm not sure it was one of his best games, but I can look. So Jake Majors, it was better than that. Not better. It was his third best game of the season. So the interior of the offensive line played well. It was those tackles who on the left side, although they didn't allow as much disruption, it was those big costly quarterback hits. And then on the right side, it just came, in volume over there, having to flush Casey and Hudson out.
All right, Alex, take a mental break because I'm going to go to Jason and I'm going to come back to you. You'll be the first guy on deck for parting shots. So I don't want to hear none of this. I don't have one. You're going to have like 5 minutes to think of something, Alex. So you don't even pay attention to what Jason's saying. Most of us don't pay attention to him anyway. Jason, from a recruiting perspective, it doesn't seem like this season's hurting the 2022 class. And it still seems like there may be some more guys to come. What kind of recruiting update can you give us right now?
Well, this was going to be my parting shot on so you're stealing my thunder here. But first off, I'll start off as I'm checking my phone here. I'm getting text messages from Jamon Tapp, who's a Texas commitment out of Louisiana, and he's telling me there's been some question whether or not he's going to sign with Texas or not. But he texted me as we're talking, he's going to sign his paperwork during the early signing period, December, and he's going to have a big ceremony on December 19th. And he's asking if I'll come down for his big signing ceremony. And I don't know if I want to make the road trip to Louisiana for that, but maybe I'll hit my man Sam Spiegelman up, who lives in Louisiana, see if he can.
You can go see Arch while you're on the way.
Well, there's always that. Yeah. So that's where Cole Patterson, he's our young road warrior. We'll send Cole down there. But it does sound like Jamon Tapp is planning to sign with Texas. So that's a bit of news, if you will, because there's been some question about that over the last couple of weeks. Anwar, to your question, it's funny, man. Last week, that Kansas game, they had one of their biggest recruiting weekends in terms of visitors come in for that game, official visitors and unofficial visitors. They had a quarterback, Devin Brown, who's a Rivals 100 member. They had 5-star offensive lineman, DJ Campbell. 5-star offensive lineman Cam Dewberry was there. Rivals 100 offensive lineman Nato Umeozulu was there. 5-star lineman Kelvin Banks was there. Cam Williams, another highly coveted offensive lineman who's committed to Oregon, was there. That's in the 2022 class. They had a bunch of 2023s, and I'm not going to bore everybody with a list of names here. But to your point, as this week has gone on, and I'm going to write about this. Not only are you stealing my thunder for my parting shot, you're stealing some of my war room thunder. To your question, not only is it not hindering Texas, this 5-game losing streak, losing to Kansas at home in front of these players, you would almost think, okay, that's going to be catastrophic for Texas, right? It's not. And on the flip side of that, Texas is turning this into a positive. And I think some of these recruits that were there, I know some of these recruits that were there on Saturday night over the course of the whole weekend, some of them, it's weirdly helping Texas with some of those guys because they say, hey, I can come in and play early. Hey, I still have faith. And they're buying into the selling point of the staff is that we need to flip the culture. We need to flip this roster. We've got to get our guys in. You are one of our guys. Come in, help us get this thing turned around. And you can do it. Not only can you help it get turned around, you can do it from day one. maybe starting from day one. That sales pitch it's landing. It's connecting with a lot of these guys to the point that I think you're going to see Texas regain some recruiting momentum, weirdly, coming out of that Kansas game. Not what I expected when that game ended. I thought, oh, this is bad news for Texas with all these recruits there. But yeah, they have found a way, and it's working to kind of turn it into a positive. And I think they're going to maybe reap some rewards of that in possibly pretty soon.
Wow. So you have any predictions at this point? I mean, do you have any? You think that certain guys on your prediction meter might be leaning towards Texas?
I do. There's been a lot of buzz about Jalen Gilbo, who was a former Texas commitment, decommitted, flipped to TCU. He was back at the game last weekend. Obviously, TCU doesn't have a head coach right now. He's a defensive back out of Port Arthur. I think a really good chance that he'll wind up back in this Texas class probably sooner rather than later. And that's good news for Texas. But the only thing people care about is these offensive linemen, right? Yeah. Texas fans, and Alex can probably talk about it, but they're like, we need a bunch of these linemen. I asked a Texas source, and, for people who are interested in this recruiting portion, Cole Patterson and I did a video on Tuesday where we really kind of dove into some of this recruiting stuff on the same Orange Blood's YouTube channel. So look for that. But, I asked a Texas source coming out of the weekend, do you feel like y'all helped your chances? And emphatically, the vibe inside the Texas football facility is that, yes, they did help themselves with some of these offensive linemen. As I'm picking up more pieces throughout the week, I think they have a really good chance still. I've always thought they had a good chance with Devon Campbell, DJ Campbell. I think they've got Nato Umeozulu is such a wild card. I can't really make a prediction there, but I have a feeling that I'm underselling Texas's chances there. I can't really make a prediction just because nobody I've talked to has a good read on Nato, but I'm like, okay, he's been to Texas for an official visit. He's been there for an unofficial visit. There's no other team that's really generating a ton of buzz. So I think I might be underselling Texas's chances with Nato. In the big one, I think Texas has a really good shot, Anwar, of flipping Kelvin Banks from Oregon. And if that happens, then it kind of has
forgiven. All is forgiven, Sark.
All is forgiven in
Kelvin Banks.
Yeah. If that happens, Alex, then what? Does that spill over to Cam Dewberry? Does that impact Cam Dewberry?
Oh God.
Does that impact Cameron Williams? Because he's also committed to Oregon, same as Kelvin Banks. So if they can land Kelvin Banks, then you have a potential snowball effect with this offensive line recruiting. And boy, that would make every Texas fan's Christmas would be happy if Texas could sign 2 or 3 of these guys I'm talking about. And I think there's a pretty good chance it could happen.
What about last one before I jump into to Alex and party shots? What about Evan Stewart? What's your read on him so far?
Evan's kind of all over the place, and I don't mean it in a bad way. He's a teenager. It's not abnormal. I've always thought he was going to come back to Texas, but I think this 4-6 start is hindering Texas with Evan more so than maybe with some of these offensive linemen. He did visit A&M 2 consecutive weekends. It was a few weekends ago, but it was back-to-back weekends. There's some thought that A&M has moved out into the front. Evans told me he's visiting Alabama. I think it might be this weekend. He didn't visit for the LSU game. So you always have to be worried about Alabama, including with wide receivers. I mean, Texas has lost to guys like Jalen Waddle to Alabama. So, Evans a tough one to predict. Would it shock me if he wound up at Texas? Wouldn't shock me, but I do think they probably need to find a way to get him back in Austin again, just to win him over and kind of have that last impression. But they can also say, hey, look what we're doing with Xavier Worthy. You, Xavier Worthy, Brendan Thompson, we get 3 of you speed demons on the field together. Nobody's going to be able to stop us. So Texas has some selling points. He likes Sark. He likes his staff. But I do think I would probably put Texas a little bit behind in that race right now, probably behind A&M, and watch out for Alabama to make a late surge as well.
All right, Alex, I've given you plenty of time. I have a question before you get into your parting shot, okay?
Okay.
Are you going hunting for your turkey?
No, I don't even, do we even have a fall turkey season during the fall? All I think about is deer. I usually go turkey hunting during the springtime. I don't know. We might have a fall turkey season, but I would never get out in the woods right now and spook any deer just to go after a turkey.
Okay, I'm just curious. I was just curious. All right, now go ahead and give me your party shot.
Okay, so this one, I mean, it's kind of a sad thing to bring up, but sad and maybe a little happy. It's sad because Derek Foreman, right? We know that Derek Foreman, who was the father of Deontay and Armani Foreman, died last month tragically, I guess in some kind of accident involving a big like a trucking accident. He was in Oklahoma. I don't have the details of exactly what happened. I'm not sure if any of you guys do, but D Foreman, man, like he was a really kind of a divisive figure on social media among a bunch of the fans, because he was a dad that really spoke up for his kids and had really, really strong opinions about, various coaching staffs and stuff like that. Probably his opinions on Tom Herman are about how the opinions of the fan base turned out to be anyway. Right. But he was my friend, and he was a guy who I got to know really well. He's been to my home. I knew him. I knew his kids. I knew his mom. And he's a dude I really liked a lot. I mean, he had a passion for life, a passion for his kids. Very, very opinionated. He'd always let you know what was going on. He always wanted to talk sports. And it was always Texans, and it was always Longhorns. And I just this week, it's like, I was just thinking to myself, I was a little bit sad because this week the Texans are going into Tennessee to play the Titans. And I just knew that this would be a game that D Foreman would be texting me all the time about, because his son Deontay now is turning out to where, over the course of these last two games, his snap percentages are really creeping up, as the dude who looks like he's maybe working his way into the role of the primary runner when they're waiting for Derrick Henry to get back. And, of course, he's coming off the Achilles tear. But Adrian Peterson has looked like junk. Jeremy McNichols is a satellite back at best, and he's been banged up. I mean, Deontay Foreman has looked good. You can kind of squint, and you can see it looks like some kind of version of Derrick Henry almost for those guys. Clearly he's not Derrick Henry, but he's been playing really well. I know his dad would be so proud of him. And I know that, the relationship those guys had, I know that especially this game being against the Texans for Deontay, the team that, after he hurt his Achilles, the team that, drafted him and cut him, his childhood favorite team growing up, his dad's favorite team. This is going to be a big game for Deontay Foreman, I think, from an emotional standpoint, I'm sure. So for this weekend, I just say, if you're a Texas fan, say a prayer for Deontay, and tune in to watch the game. Look, I mean, that's an offense that now has Deontay Foreman. Jeff Swaim is playing a ton for that offense. Marcus Johnson now with Julio Jones out has been playing a ton. Marcus Johnson almost had a 100-yard game last week. So Texas fans could be interested in watching that game. I think it's going to be a special one for Deontay Foreman, and I hope he goes big, man. It's been a tough road for him, not only with his NFL career and everything, but then this year with the tragedies for his family. So I wish him the best, and I'll be watching that game closely this weekend.
Yeah, we all, I think, had some sort of relationship with Derek Foreman, and the one thing you couldn't say, or could say, he definitely was passionate, or could not say he was not passionate, but he was very passionate. Definitely wasn't afraid to say what was on his mind. Like, here's the one thing you knew about him: if he liked you, you knew it. If he didn't like you, you knew it. But there was no middle ground. There was no BS. And, a lot of times people BS you and they're not as forthcoming or honest. And he definitely was. And he loved his kids. And it definitely was super sad to hear about that trucking accident. And I got on their Facebook page and saw when they got these trucks, and it just kind of see the progression, the happiness, and then, that kind of tragedy. So yeah, it definitely, RIP. I know you and I both had relationships with him, so definitely RIP to Derek Foreman. Jason, what's your parting shot?
That's a good parting shot, Alex. And you said Marcus Johnson. That's funny. I got to know Marcus's dad quite a bit when the day he was a recruit and at Texas, and he and I still text. In the NFL when he has a big Sunday, I'll be like, "Oh, Marcus," we'll text back and forth. So it's kind of cool, some of the relationships we build over the course of this job. Yeah, Anwar, I don't have, like I said, you stole my thunder earlier. I was going to say, hey, potentially good news coming. So I'll just kind of circle back to that. Everybody makes jokes about, oh, was your story written? Stories written. Well, I don't know specifically the wins of some of these things. Some of them, a couple of them, maybe I do. But I am expecting good recruiting news for Texas, and some of it's not set in stone. I think I've said this maybe on our Slack channel. I can't remember who all I communicate with, but things are certainly trending well for Texas to finish on a high note with this recruiting class, which is kind of counteractive to what you would assume on a 5-game losing streak. But yeah, all hope is not lost, Longhorn fans. Maybe Texas can win 2 games, get to a bowl game, not the season you envisioned, but maybe reinforcements are on the way. So we've got a little less than a month until the early signing window opens. So it could be a fun finish for the next 4 weeks leading up to that signing window.
Well, for me, I've been racking my brain, and I know this is obviously tough for all Longhorn fans to be sitting at 4 and 6 and trying to figure out how the hell you got here and what the hell is going on. I would say this: if you're a Texas fan, this will be my parting shot. If you're a Texas fan, the belief that you had in Steve Sarkisian has got to be the belief that's going to need to carry you not only through the signing day class, but throughout the offseason. Like now, as much as disappointing as it is, and sometimes you may hear us question things, and that's what we have to do. So that's going to happen. But you as a Texas fan, I think you still have to say, all right, this is the guy. This is the guy for the job. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. So you got to get your support behind him. Still support your team. I know it's got to be tough as shit because my gosh, this is the second time we've covered a Kansas loss in our careers, especially since I've been here, which seems unfathomable to say the least. But you still got to hope that Sarkisian figures it out. I think I've always said Sarkisian's a guy that was unproven as a head coach. And then you've got to hope that he figures it out as a head coach, not as an assistant. And so you still got to keep your fingers crossed that, Jason points to a talented recruiting class that's coming in. Of course, if we believe the Rivals rankings, because after 2019, I don't know what the hell to believe anymore, but have faith. Let's see if this team finishes out strong, finishes on a high note. If somehow this team's able to win the next 3, maybe feel a little bit better. Wouldn't be the season that you wanted, but it beats losing the next 2. That's for damn sure. So on that note, no Jeff Ketchum this week, but for Alex and for Jason and for everybody else at Orange Buzz, and thank you. By the way, we are almost at 8,000 subscribers here on this YouTube channel. So pass it along to your friends. Just tell them to come in and like and subscribe everything. And, make sure you get these videos that we're putting out here. We'll have a lot more in the off season. Serenity's did some really good interviews this week. She's talked to Joseph Osai recently. I think she talked to Malcolm Roach, if I'm correct, this week as well. So go ahead and check that interview out on the channel. The recruiting stuff that's here. We've got everything that you need. Anyone who's ever complained and said, you guys put stuff behind a paywall, I can't get your information. You can get the in-depth, detailed information by subscribing to Orange Bloods. You can also get some of that information here on this YouTube channel. So we've got you covered. You guys have a fantastic weekend. We will see what happens on Saturday. Jeff and I will have the post-game show. Hopefully we'll have something better to discuss because I don't want to throw away another one of those bowl pamphlets that I had to do after the game. Until then, I'll talk to you guys too. See ya.